of course, by former kind of, I guess you could say, when we're independent in a lot of different ways, but one of the best Cardinals YouTubers out there in Joe Como, aka the Cardinal Rule. The professor is here joining me. Joe, we got some Cardinals football to talk about. There's a schedule, and we're going to kind of theme this show as the good, the bad, and the ugly. But speaking of good, bad, and ugly, how are you doing? How was your week?
Well, I think I'm probably more the ugly of that trifecta. But no, my week's been good. We were just talking off air. I had a nice, fun trip to. One of my hobbies is the paranormal, and I teach a class about that. So I got to go to this paranormal convention, meet a bunch of famous people, do a ghost hunt, and my brother lives 30 minutes from there, so I got to hang out with him. So I'm doing good. Just my social battery is full, and now I get to drain whatever hope I have as we look at the Cardinals season yet to come.
Absolutely. This is, of course, being recorded on a Friday, so with some breaking news we can talk about, although it's not necessarily new news, but Jacoby Brissett is still holding out, of course, in negotiating, trying to rework the last year of his contract for 2026, and he's prepared to miss OTAs, of course, without a new deal, according to Jeremy Fowler of ESPN. It seems like he's braced to miss time. A lot of what we've kind of heard from rumblings is that he could want money guaranteed for 2027 as well. So when you're talking about ghosts and paranormal, there's kind of this ghost hanging over the Cardinals facility of Jacoby Brissett. There's a picture of him up on the wall after the Dallas Cowboys victory, and he is not there for OTAs. We'll see what happens when it gets to the mandatory workouts that the team has before the big break up until training camp. But Joe, this is one of those spots where a lot of Cardinals fans are gotten tired of this, have wanted to move on. I think it's one of those weird areas where both the Cardinals and Jacoby have something to gain by reworking a new deal, but it seems like the two sides are far apart on what that could entail.
I agree with you. And I think some of the discourse on this has been really driven by emotions and feelings. People keep citing, he was, his 1-11 record, which, wins and losses are not a quarterback stat, they're a team stat. And he is what he is. He's not a 1-11 quarterback. He is a very good bridge quarterback who you don't want as your long-term starter. And if he is your backup, you're in really good shape. That's what he is. And right now, for where they are, I think he's actually a really good person to have in the building. He's a veteran. He's smart. He's been in different systems. He's a good leader. And whether Beck, will talk about him later, ends up being the guy, but more likely someone they draft next year becomes the guy. He's the perfect person to have in that spot. So if you can get the money right in a way that does not compromise your roster building for the future, that's the key. Take feelings out of it. People say, well, he shouldn't be getting starter money because of the record. If you can give him a bump in salary that keeps him happy, keeps him here, and that bump does not take away from your ability to extend players like Michael Wilson, who will be talking about Paris Johnson Jr., or it does not compromise your ability to add pieces you need, then make it happen. There is a point where what he's asking for could be too much, but I don't think it's going to be exorbitant what he's looking for. I think it's probably going to be more realistic. So if you can make it happen, make it happen. It's going to help the development of whoever is the next quarterback to have him in the building.
Yeah, and that's what makes this so interesting, is that it seems the two sides are significantly far apart, according to what Josh Weinfuss says. So if you're talking about significantly far apart, that's a much bigger deal than just give him a $5 million pay bump at least. And I think that the key, at least through the lens that I am seeing, is I'm thinking that Jacoby wants money for 2027. And you say, well, why would he want money for 2027, even if you give him a pay bump for this year? If he comes back for 2027 and gets guaranteed money, that assures him to be the backup next year, or to at least start the first couple of games for if there's another rookie quarterback, potentially he could get a chance to start this season. Carson Beck takes over. He could then back up Carson Beck. He's kind of leveraging, I think, to keep himself not just in the league, but keep himself in a good spot with the Cardinals. The problem, of course, I think, Joe, is the Cardinals have Carson Beck under contract. They drafted a quarterback in the 3rd round, and they're probably going to, unless things go really well for them this year with their current quarterback staples, it seems like they could be primed to draft another quarterback next year if it is indeed this, quarterback class of greatness, and there's no class that seems to ever live up to that reputation. But this could be an example, at least I'm wondering, where Jacoby is wanting to get guarantees for next year so he can either be the backup next year, have a job. And the Cardinals are saying, we just want Carson Beck to be our cheap backup next year. Right now, Carson Beck, when you're talking about his contract, It is significantly cheaper than what the Cardinals have paid out for their other two quarterbacks in the past couple of years. 4-year deal worth $7 million. You're talking about $1.8 million per year is his average. That is significantly lower than paying Gardner Minshew $6 million this year. It's lower than what you're paying Jacoby this year. He's making $1.5 million this year, guaranteed money. That's not counting the rest of his deal. This might just be a spot where the Cardinals want to go cheaper for next year and don't have Jacoby in their plans and already have a backup on the roster, if not a starter in Carson Beck. I'm wondering if that's the key to where there's a gap, unless Jacoby is just saying, give me $20 million guaranteed for this year and a little bit of money for next year to be able to at least make sure that I can feed my family for, this year and the next year and have a little bit to store away and sort of a nest egg. I think that may be why it's a significant gap in between the two sides right now.
I think that makes a lot of sense. If things in this whole deal are going in ways that make sense from the business of football, and we're talking about the Cardinals, so that is not always how things operate. But
point.
let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say that this is a conventional NFL cap management operations question. Then the caps hit and the guaranteed money for 2027 are what matter. They have roughly, depending, I know the cap estimates always range from site to site, but a little over 30 million in cap space right now. This is not a team that's going to go out and, sign major free agents. That's not where they're at right now. They've already, obviously we've been through the first kind of thrust of free agency. Now it's kind of that picking pieces here. They have the cap room to give him probably whatever he wants this year. So if there's a hang up, it's not likely that. It is more likely what you're talking about, at least under conventional NFL business kind of and cap management principles. It is avoiding having having guaranteed money in 2027 when what they're hoping to do is have Beck as the backup, or maybe the starter for the first half while the rookie is sitting, right? Or some combination of that. And Brissett probably moved on to somewhere else. So what you're saying makes perfect sense, which is probably why it's not what's happening with in the Cardinals building. But no, that checks out in terms of everything you say there.
Yeah, like you said, conventional wisdom would say this is a deal that should be able to get done, or at least you just bump Jacoby's guarantees up for this year, make sure he gets an extra $5 million, and if he wants $10 million, you can negotiate back and forth and compromise. Maybe the Cardinals simply just say he's not worth us paying this amount of money to for going 1-11 last year. I think that doesn't fit with conventional wisdom, considering, like you said, with the average for what a starting quarterback is going to be paid in the NFL, what we just saw Aaron Rodgers get a 1-year, $25 million deal, and he made the playoffs last year, but was not really a great quality quarterback. I understand that there needs to be some kind of compromise, and I think normally you'd get to that sort of compromise. But conventional wisdom seems to be out the door right now. A lot of Cardinals fans are upset because it seems like the Cardinals put a picture of Jacoby up in the locker room, announced he was going to be the starter through John Gambadoro. Whether the Cardinals fumbled that or whether Jacoby is likewise saying, oh, you're going to say that, fine, I want $20 million for this year, when he's overestimating his value. And both sides are screwing it up. Right. Whatever the case, something has happened here, and there's going to be something that's going to have to give, because this is a business of compromise. Teams eventually will either bite the bullet and pay guys, or players will bite the bullet and bet on themselves, and to lesser of a degree will take less money to be able to actually go out there and put that food on the table. It's right now kind of an ugly situation. The hope, of course, I think would be Jacoby shows up, the Cardinals are able to give some assurances that, yes, we're willing to compromise with you in some regard, put out at least enough goodwill toward Jacoby to get him back into the building. But right now, it's a pretty ugly situation as we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly today, Joe.
Yeah, well, and there's rumors also on that note that Josh Sweat isn't happy and may, I don't know how viable these rumors are, but that maybe even wants to trade, and I wouldn't blame him, right? He came in with Jonathan Gannon, and Jonathan Gannon's gone. So this is an ugly time for the Cardinals. They are, in a tough situation, and we just kind of have to hold our nose and get through it, and hope that we have, that the draft gods like us next year with the quarterback, and that our new coach gets some of his systems in place. But this is going to be a rough year. And we're going to talk about the schedule does not do us any favors. This will be a very difficult year to kind of get through as a Cardinals fan.
And it will, yes. So we're going to go and kind of feature the good, the bad, and the ugly, but we kind of started with the ugly, at least for where it is. Speaking of ugly, let's talk now with ugly and talk about the Cardinals' start to that schedule because, oh boy, Joe, it is brutal. Cardinals open up at least with the Chargers week 2 as their home opener. I saw an ad on Twitter the other day from the Cardinals saying, we've got your plans for you. Go ahead and cancel your plans. Week 2 at home against the Seattle Seahawks. So you're like, ooh, I don't know about those plans. Like, you've got plans that are made for me. I want to be able to support the team, but that's a really tough pill to swallow for a home opener. You follow that up, of course, with having, I believe it is 4 of the first 6 weeks are going to be, I think it's actually 5 of the first 6 weeks are going to be, no, 4 of the first 6 are on the road for the Arizona Cardinals. They played the Niners, followed by the New York Giants, who Malik Neighbors keeps seemingly having health questions that pop up, which we'll see how that goes, followed by the Lions, Rams, and Broncos. So this is an ugly, ugly start to the schedule, Joe. There's no way around that.
This is a brutal start, as you point out, but I want to just add even a little more, twist the knife just a little more. You look at that first 6 or 7 games, the easy game on that is the Giants, but that's traveling across the country from we have the 49ers the week before that, traveling to East Rutherford for an away game against the Giants, right? Yeah. With a coach that's going to have them prepared. So the easy game has structural things about it that makes it, not exactly the ideal scenario. So this is an absolutely brutal stretch. We have, the Broncos were in the AFC Championship game, right? They were 1 injury away from potentially being in the Super Bowl. Yep. After that, you have the Cowboys. The second easiest game is against the Cowboys on the road, arguably, right? And, because they were 7 wins last year, but we know the kind of talent that they have on the roster. They have a quarterback. So this is an absolutely brutal stretch. I'm optimistically going to hope they pull out a win somewhere, but it is not at all inconceivable to imagine they go winless in that stretch.
Yeah, the Cardinals, as far as it being ugly, we've talked about Jacoby holding out. We've talked about Josh Sweat. One of the biggest, ugliest things for the Cardinals is the lack of defensive improvements that they've made this offseason. They had a couple of guys to the defensive line, but a lot of it was bringing guys back. They brought back LJ Collier, brought back Sean Murphy-Bunting, which is a move that I didn't necessarily like, but I can understand because you don't know what Garrett Williams' health is going to be. You didn't really go out and spend. You pushed cap money to next year, and maybe the thought is we're not going to be good this year. Why would we spend tons of money to be average at best when we could then push back money and start spending in 2027? It's just one of those places that's been ugly because there's been no defensive improvements that the Cardinals were able to make outside of drafting a special teams player in round 6 and a small school, which I love the player, but don't get me wrong, it's still a small school FCS player in Caleb Proctor. And you're expecting guys to be able to take a step forward and stay healthy. But I think part of the reason why this is considered ugly is because despite some of the talent, which there is good talent, we'll talk about in the good, the bad, and the ugly, the fact that they didn't actively go out and say, we're going to take this 29th to 31st ranked defense and improve it for next year is where it's one of the ugliest eyesores on the Cardinals, because no matter how good that offense is, they gave up 28 points per game last year and didn't really do much to stop that.
Yeah, and I think you hit on they did not do enough to improve the roster in terms of free agency. Even in the draft, drafted 1 player who we both liked, but is a player who who's not going to step in and be a difference maker, right? Caleb Proctor is more of a potential at the best we're going to see from him this year is that he's a guy in the rotation, maybe like Dante Stills in his rookie year contributes some, right? That's kind of the most likely best case scenario. So you kind of said it in passing that what they're depending on is people being healthy who were not healthy and people taking a step forward. Now, to give a silver lining to this, there is some young talent that they've invested draft capital that has showed promise, right? We'll talk about Will Johnson, but also Denzel Burke, played solid for a guy who was a 5th round pick. Yeah. You have some, Rabbit, right? Who is a guy who has looked good at points. And you have some other players, Walter Nolan, obviously we'll talk about. And so there's some players on this roster that if they take a step forward in their development, it could be a better defense than it was last year because, well, it was really bad. So that's not a high bar. But you really hate to be leaning fully on that, right? As your only hope for being a better defense. In terms of guys you brought in, guys like Wingard, I like some of the guys they brought in as depth. They raised the floor, but they did not they didn't move the needle enough that you feel confident that this defense is going to move into a middle third of the pack defense, which is kind of what you would hope as far as the step forward from where they were. So it's going to be fun watching some of the individual players maybe find their footing, but the defensive product as a whole, there's not a lot to be terribly optimistic about right now.
Right. And one of the toughest parts for the Cardinals fans, at least, is Josh Sweat has not shown up. Now, these are granted voluntary workouts. He didn't show up to some voluntary workouts previously last year. But with the rumors that he's been unhappy, you take a look at that Cardinals defense without having Josh Sweat on the field as a pass rusher. And granted, I think Sweat could have shown a bit more last year. Everyone knows, who's a Cardinals fan, his stats that he did not have a single sack in the fourth quarter when it came to last year. And the Cardinals played in a lot of close games in the fourth quarter. So that's something you'd love to see him change and step up. You hope that it doesn't get to where he starts holding out during when he's supposed to actually have involuntary or required workouts to be at, because then you're going to start talking about, do you have to trade him? Is he going to hold back or hold out at least into the regular season because he just is wanting to be with Jonathan Gannon potentially? That was one of the guys who helped bring him in. Or is this just kind of a big hullabaloo where he doesn't have to show up? He's not happy, but he's not going to just forfeit money by not showing up and not playing football, even if it is one of those places where you're a player who is expecting the team to be better, hoping that it's a playoff team, and you're not going to be looking at a winning team. That's just kind of the nature of work, unfortunately. A lot of times you go to a job that you don't necessarily like, but it puts bread on the table. Other times you're at a job that you feel like you're thriving in. And that's similar to how it is with players. The biggest difference, of course, is you're not essentially having this multi-million-dollar product that is relying on number 10 getting home at least on third downs for you, as far as the entire structure of your defense relying on it. That's one of the ugly things that's going on right now, because you would want to see Josh Sweat be present with the rest of the team, talking up how he's excited to be back for a second year with Nick Rallis and talking about the new head coach. Instead, it's crickets there, because he just has not been able to show up. And that's one of those things that is pretty ugly for the most part when it comes to the Cardinals.
Yeah, the pass rush obviously is one of the weaker areas of the roster. Really, outside of Josh Sweat, there's not any pass rush that you feel any confidence and consistency in. Nolan will be pass rush if he's healthy, right? But you don't want to rely solely on that. So, this defense, it was already an area of concern. And if Josh Sweat ends up becoming a player who is removed from the equation by trade or holdout or both, then that defense that we were already not feeling great about looks like it did a couple years ago when we didn't have any pass rush, and which stymies the development of those cornerbacks, right? The cornerbacks that we're relying on, which as I think we'll talk about, not a lot of proven cornerbacks, a lot of potential guys I like on this roster. For them to develop without a pass rush really makes it a lot more difficult.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why the Cardinals right now are favored in absolutely zero of their 17 games. They're even home underdogs against the New York Jets, which I think is just a slap in the face insult. That's pretty ugly when you're talking about a Jets team that traded away all of their players to try to tank for this draft class is favored ahead of you. It just shows that odds makers are not liking what the Arizona Cardinals did this offseason, and it really shows that they just are selling on your product as a whole. This has been pretty ugly to talk about. We haven't even talked about Gardner Minshew. There was an ugly throw in Cardinals OTAs that was picked off easily by Dadrian Taylor-Demerson. The camera angle was a little late, so you couldn't exactly see who threw the ball, but it was clearly underthrown. We don't have to really pretend that there's going to be optimism or hope. Anything besides what we could hope for is going to be through Carson Beck getting back some of his arm strength. That's where I think we can talk about what is the ugly with this Cardinals team all day. What's I think underrated at this point is part of where I talked with Bucky Brooks earlier this week about the good on this team, which is the talent. And a lot of that starts with Trey McBride, Michael Wilson, and Paris Johnson on the offensive side of the ball. You've got a franchise caliber left tackle, one of the best, if not the best, tight end in football, and a wide receiver who 3 years into his career finally hit 1,000 yards receiving, outplayed Marvin Harrison Jr. last year overall. And you just added Jeremiah Love to that trio. That's one of those things that obviously can be talked about as good. I would even go so far as to say great. The only reason why it's not great, I think, is if it was great enough to support whatever quarterback, you probably wouldn't see people as down on the Cardinals as they've been this far related. But this is a honestly great building block of weapons to be able to have, if you include Marvin in that aspect, as far as your skill position players, and of course having your franchise left tackle under contract. It is one of the good, bad, and the ugly. A lot of stuff Cardinals fans can hope for, at least, is recognizing that this isn't going to be a long-term downturn like we saw from 2023 to 2024 and then taking a step back in 2025. Because you've got these building blocks, you can actually build something out of them.
Yeah, our skill position players on offense are good enough to be the skill position players for a contender if you had a quarterback and a good defense, right? Like you can always get more receiver depth, but if you got the quarterback right, got the defense right, you would not be deficient in your playmakers between Trey McBride, Michael Wilson. Yeah. And listen, Marvin Harrison Jr., I know we saw some things you post on Twitter, and there's some questions about him. But if he is even if he ends up not being what we thought he was, but he's still an 800-yard receiver as our number 2 wide receiver in an offense where our primary pass catcher is actually our tight end, plus a really good running game, right, with Jeremiah Love and the depth we have at running back. That's all you need when you get your quarterback. You can win with that. So that is a strength. And having your left tackle, and Paris Johnson Jr. is not a Pro Bowl left tackle, but he is an absolutely bona fide franchise left tackle. Like he is in the top 10 to 12, you could argue, at left tackle, and has room to get better and has the skill set to get better. So you're solid in that spot. And as a Cardinals fan, there have been a lot of long stretches where we did not have that. So you've got some great foundations to build on, right? Some really key things, pass catchers and left tackle in particular. So those are absolutely some silver linings. And I'll tell you, if Brissett gets back in house, he's not a guy you want to build around, but he can throw the ball, move the ball downfield. We saw that. This offense can and will put up points with the improved offensive line, right, that we've got this year, plus Jeremiah Love. Like the offense, this will be a team that loses a lot of boat races this year is kind of what I think we're going to see.
Yeah, I mean, with Jeremiah Love, just talking about the quality of the player, like the closest comparison I think that I've been able to make is back to when they had David Johnson. You saw the Cardinals. They had a 7-win, I think it was an 8-win season, unless I'm mistaken, in their final season with Bruce Arians. Maybe it was 7. That was his only technical losing season. Was 2017. I'll have to double check that. But when you're talking about just the absolute talent that he is at the running back spot as a rusher and a receiver, it's one of those places where you're looking at the Christian McCaffrey comparisons that he gets. That's going to create matchup nightmares. That's going to make things easier on a quarterback. Even if you don't have the mobility of a Jacoby Brissett, if you do have Gardner Minshew back there as someone who can run around a bit, and we've seen Carson Beck kind of be somewhere in the middle where he's maybe not quite as mobile as Gardner, but he's going to have that similar size and ability to stand in the pocket and take a hit like Jacoby. That means that Jeremiah Love on third down is going to be available, similar to what we saw with James Conner being a weapon in the receiving game the last few years. I think part of the good is we have to talk about this run game is going to be better than 31st overall last year. It's going to be better 100%, and that improved O-line and the improved running back room is going to be a big part of it.
Yeah, obviously we went into last year expecting the running game to be a strength of this team, and it fell apart. People talk about Clayton Adams being the missing piece of that, and certainly that was part of it. Certainly the injuries didn't help, but you've come back with Paris Johnson Jr., obviously, who we talked about, but you added, the left tackle, Samuel, and we added kind of a really physical guard in the draft. And, Elijah Wilkinson as your right tackle, that's maybe the weak link, but it's probably better than what we had going on last year. And Froholt has been solid. So like this is a competent offensive line with some depth. They brought in Pryor, who is some nice depth, and then guys that started games for us, Isaiah Adams last year, for example, is now depth, right? So that improved offensive line, plus you have James Conner coming back. You bring in, from Atlanta, Algier, right? Taylor Algier, although he's understandably not exactly happy. I feel bad for the guy, right?
Hey, I think he'll get goal line work.
Yes.
I think that he's going to get some of that third and short work potentially early on in the season, and he's under contract for the next 2 years. If this is really the last year for James Conner, maybe that he's going to end up splitting some carries with Conner. But ultimately, it is one of those spots where it would not shock me at all if you're looking at this and fantasy fans are upset because it's like Chris Johnson in 2015 and David Johnson 2015, where you do see Jeremiah Love used like on kickoffs occasionally, eventually carve out his niche on third down work. And as Tyler Algier is carrying the ball for the first 8 games, and then once he kind of is like, hey, he's taken on a lot of carries, he's had time in the league, you switch roles around, and Jeremiah Love takes on the second half of the season as the lead back. That would not shock me one bit.
Not at all. There's some great running backs in the squad, but from a fantasy perspective, I would be very concerned about because you're going to have someone like Love, you're going to have to take pretty early in a fantasy draft, right? So, and will the consistent usage be there? But yeah, like they have there, and that running game is going to go a long way for this offense. It's going to, I would anticipate they will lean on it heavily because of the defensive concerns, right? That's how you keep yourself in games. If you don't have a great defense, right? You keep that defense off the field. So the running game both has the horses to make it work, but there's also the motivation, from a game script perspective to lean on that because of the defense.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of the defense, that is one of the places where we can talk about the good, which is Walter Nolan and Will Johnson showed flashes last year as far as being able to look at on the defensive side of the ball. They brought back Roy Lopez. You're also talking about Mac Wilson coming back off of injury. And while they let Jalen Thompson go, you've got draft picks available in Adrian Taylor-Demerson, Denzel Burke. We'll see what happens with Garrett Williams. He's actually in my bad category, ultimately, because there's some questions we can get to on him. But they added some safety depth as well. And one of the biggest standout players, I think, for the Cardinals continues to be the development of Cody Simon at the middle linebacker spot. He's taken on and is actually starting over Jack Gibbons going into camp. If he's able to blossom into a true Mike linebacker, that's great. Josh Sweat, as we know, is also part of the good. He went to the ugly because obviously there's a holdout there and there's going to be questions about the pass rush, but it really does start and end with Walter Nolan and Will Johnson. We saw how disruptive he was, and we saw that Walter Nolan really health was the biggest question for both guys. They can have a healthy year. They could be part of, I think, the good. And like you said, a bounce back year for this defense.
Yeah. Both of those players flashed. Obviously we saw, what it was people loved about them coming out in the draft. We just didn't see enough of it because of the injuries. And, that is something that we have to be concerned about, right? Especially with Johnson, that Will Johnson, that was kind of the thing. That's why he fell to the second round. But if both of those players play 3/4 of the season, maybe miss a game here or there, which is pretty common in the NFL, right? You kind of having someone play 17 games is a luxury, it feels like. But if both of them play a majority of the games and take that step forward, you would expect that you saw from those flashes. That's something to be excited about. And not that that's going to be enough to turn this into a good defense, but those two players coming into their own and becoming top 10 at their positions, which is absolutely in the realm possibility for both of them. Yeah. If both of them were to become top 10 within their position and kind of start hitting that stride, hitting that potential, that could go a long way in making this defense, take a leap from in the bottom couple defense, being one of the worst 2 or 3 to maybe being ranked 22, right? 21. If you can see them move forward, you could see a market improvement and some hope for the next year when they actually add some pieces in the draft and do some things in free agency. So those two are the biggest keys to this defense overachieving.
Yeah, I think one of the last things we'll talk about as far as the good before we get to the schedule, I would say, is Mike LaFleur. I think that is an improvement on the offensive side of the ball from a schematic perspective, bringing in the Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay sort of scheme that is going to be much more balanced. We saw at least previously in 2023 to 24, great rushing attack for the Cardinals. I mean, the passing attack was needed and teams were able to shut down the run. They had too simplistic of routes. There was a lot of issues that they had in the passing game with Kyler Murray, and maybe some of that is limitations of the quarterback. That's part of the question, of course, is going to be, was that one of the areas of having a shorter quarterback clogging up some of those lanes? But when it came to Jacoby Brissett, we saw last year when the Cardinals lost offensive linemen, lost running backs, could not run the ball whatsoever. We saw the creativity and the run game kind of went away, and maybe some of that is because they're down to fourth-string running backs. But we got to see the passing offense on full blow, and here's kind of the problem is that when you look at Jacoby Brissett last year, yeah, sure, he ended up having a solid year, but especially for fantasy purposes. But that passing attack, they threw the ball 40 times a game. Like he had 485 attempts last year and played in only 12 games. That means on average, he was throwing the ball 40 times a game. You normally want to see your quarterback throw the ball 25 to 30 times a game. So they're throwing it 40 times a game. They only average 20.8 points per game or 20.9 points per game. When you're throwing the ball 40 times per game, you should be putting up like 30 points or so, like you're doing it. We saw, I think, a lot of issues with this offensive scheme where Jacoby would take sacks, would throw the ball, would take sacks, throw the ball. This passing attack just was not up to par. I think you're going to see an improvement schematically because I do not think that at the end of the day, I think that maybe good but not great is the best that you could get from what the Cardinals offensive coordinator had been. I don't know if we're going to find out if he's a bad offensive coordinator until this year when he goes to a new team with the Lions. Was it bad? Because now you got good personnel is what you can say with Drew Petzing. So I've got Mike LaFleur as good as far as for an upgrade this year, and I think we're going to see a lot more balance than we did with the Cardinals the last couple of years, especially improvements in the passing game because these passing concepts are going to be not necessarily married to the running concept, but you're going to be able to get guys freer and more open than you have been under the Drew Petzing offense.
Yeah, I'm with you in being cautiously optimistic about the LaFleur hiring. I know some people are down on it. It was ranked as one of the worst hires by some media people. And you know, I get the Cardinals were arguably the least desirable job, and understandably so. We look at the ownership and then the quarterback situation. So I don't begrudge that assessment of this job. And I think considering that the top candidates were probably not considering this job, actually, I think this was probably a best case scenario outcome, because what you've got is the kind of hire that you hope to find, that offensive coordinator who comes from a good pedigree, who will be your head coach and playmaker. They tried to do that with Kingsbury, but the mistake they made was going to the college ranks directly rather than getting an offensive coordinator, you know, and your head coach needs to have NFL coaching experience. That's just, I think the history has shown that pretty consistently. And there's a good track record of the McVay coordinators, right? Obviously, Matt LaFleur, Kevin O'Connell, Liam Cohn, right? Zach Taylor, you know, was not, he was a quarterback's coach, but a coach out of that system. These are coaches that have done well elsewhere, you know, to varying degrees. So when you look at the archetype of what was the best chance for the Cardinals to kind of catch lightning in the bottle and do something that's going to work coaching wise, it probably was finding that guy who's the offensive wunderkind who can come in and do, you know, what someone like Kevin O'Connell has done in Minnesota, right? And creating a place where the system works really well and you can elevate the quarterback, you know, in that system.
And then if you find a good quarterback like they did with Sam Darnold, then you get to see them go as far as they did, at least for the most part. That's what you're trying to ultimately find.
So is LaFleur the guy? We'll see, but he's the archetype. It's the right type of hire that gives you the best chance, I think, in this situation.
And compared to the last hire, the Cardinals tried to do the same thing, which was Cliff
Yeah.
Kingsbury. No NFL experience, no
Mhm.
NFL contacts, had not spent any time. He was protege of Sean McVay. Now is working under Sean McVay, interestingly enough, but it was definitely a place where it took ultimately a couple of years to get going. And by the time that they were ready for the contract extensions, a lot of things just fell apart. I think there was deeper seated things than Cliff
Mhm.
ultimately. And some of that at least goes back to the Cardinals are in their first year without Kyler Murray at quarterback, and we're going to see at least how that works. We know they went 1-11 without him last year, and it just shows, I think, what the value is, not just of having a good quality coach, but having a franchise quarterback who is actually a franchise quarterback in tow, to team consistency. If you want good stuff about the Cardinals schedule, I got 4 games for you. And they're
Mhm.
all 4 games at the very end of the schedule. They're week 15 after the bye week. You get to play the Jets. You play the New Orleans Saints on the road. You get 3 of your last 4 games are at home. You play the Las Vegas Raiders. You're probably at that point going to be seeing what Carson Beck has for you. And in week 18, for all we know, the San Francisco 49ers, they could be completely out of it and could be sitting guys. You've got an opportunity to win some games, but goodness, if that's your good news, is the last 4 games of the year, that's not a lot to look forward to for Cardinals fans from September through December 20th, I would say, with the
Mhm.
week 14 bye week also being this year. That falls into the bad news category. But let's talk about these last 4 games, because some Cardinals fans have even said this is bad news. I want to lose as many games as possible. Get me that number 1 or number 2 pick. I don't fall into that category. I think it's one of those areas where you let the chips fall where they may and
Mhm.
see what ultimately happens. And if you do win a couple games at the end of the year, if that's your respite from what's been a brutal year, then that maybe is the best thing we could have for Cardinals fans as far as something good to look forward to.
Yeah, I think you want to end the year with some positive momentum. It doesn't necessarily have to be wins, but at least being competitive. But a couple wins in there would certainly be something to look for, to kind of feel positive about as you go into the next season. And I will overlay with that what it might mean in terms of what's going on with Carson Beck, right?
Mm, yeah.
There's a good chance at this point maybe they give him some start. He's starting, if nothing else, because they want to see what they have in him, right? And this stretch of games would be a really good place to do that, right? Now maybe he's already starting well before that, but that would be a nice stretch to kind of see him kind of end the season on, to get some good starts under his belt. And I'm not a Carson Beck truther. I think there is a universe where he becomes a decent system quarterback that's effective. But I, like most people, look at next year. But Carson Beck, you want him to get some starts under his belt if he's going to be your long-term backup, right? So from a development perspective, getting him in there in some games where he has a chance to be the starter, maybe win a few games and find his footing. When you are the backup, other than preseason games, you don't get a lot of action until they need you, right? So if he can get 5 or 6 good starts under his belt, and then he's their backup, those 5 or 6 starts are really helpful 2, 3, and 4 years down the road in terms of experience when he is that backup to whoever we draft next year.
For sure, for sure. It's just one of those areas where, like a lot of Cardinals fans, you would regret if the team is in position for the
Mhm.
number 1 pick. I remember back that Philadelphia Eagles game. It was actually, of all people, Cardinals insider Mike Jurecki was the person who seemed to be the most deflated. He goes on his podcast one week and is like, "Hey, Cardinals going to be taking a quarterback next year. They beat the Eagles with Kyler Murray at quarterback." He comes in the next day and is like, all right, like they're probably going to be taking a receiver because they're not going to be in a quarterback spot anymore. I think a lot of Cardinals fans are with Kyler Murray. You were wanting Marvin Harrison Jr. and to at least give it a shot with the new system without Cliff Kingsbury, see what it had. We got as far as it could carry. Now I think there's Cardinals fans who are nervous and kind of concerned that could be the same with a game with a win against the Jets or more. The good news, though, if you're a Cardinals fan who wants to lose games this season, we get to the bad, which now is out of the good, the bad, and the ugly. The bad is that middle part of the schedule. Because you talk about the Dallas Cowboys being a winnable game for the Arizona Cardinals. They followed up with 3 games against the Seattle Seahawks in week 9 on the road, at home against the Los Angeles Rams week 10. They then play the Kansas City Chiefs, in which Patrick Mahomes will certainly be back by then, following what could be an improved Washington Commanders team. And then, of course, at home against the Philadelphia Eagles starting that home stretch. Maybe the Commanders is one of those teams that you can kind of catch for a win. But other than that, that is a somewhat just as brutal part of the schedule as the earliest part as well. It's maybe even tougher in that degree, just because you have to go back to playing the Seahawks, the Rams, and the Chiefs, and you'll be completely beat up before you get to the teams like the Commanders and maybe the Eagles. Things implode this year with Jalen Hurts at quarterback and with that coach that no one seems to believe in, yet he has Super Bowl wins. It's always funny how those things kind of go together. Like, it's like how, hey, John Harbaugh got fired this year. You're like, that John Harbaugh got fired from that Ravens team. It just shows that it's not for long in the NFL. That's one of the things that I think is probably one of the most difficult things for Cardinals fans to look at is this isn't going to get easier after that opening stretch. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better at the end of the year.
Yeah, that is, like you said, it's a brutal stretch. I mean, the Cowboys and the Commanders, those are the 2 teams you look at that. And those aren't games you circle and say we should win. Those are games you circle and say it would not be the most massive upset of the week if we won, right?
Yeah.
Every other one of those games, it would be a headlining upset.
100%.
And that's, before seeing the schedule, I was maybe a little more optimistic about the Cardinals than some people. And by optimistic, I didn't mean they were going to be anywhere close to playoff team, but I was thinking, this offense is going to put up points with what we talked about earlier with the skill position players. Brissett can move the ball. The defense might take a little bit of a step forward, and maybe they win 6 games. That was kind of where I was at before. But when you see the schedule and the way it's stacked and the way it lines up, that really kind of falls away now. And you look at it and you're like, this team will really overachieve if they win more than 4 games. Right. And that stretch, the opening, we talk about how tough it is. And the middle stretch is only slightly less difficult because we at least have a Commanders game and a Cowboys game in there.
Hey, and it could be more difficult. For all we know, the Cowboys and Commanders could both go back and be playoff teams, and the New York Giants are the ones that need to take a year to get going because of the lack of neighbors. And so you get a win, and then you're like, oh, great. Now we get to play back against the Rams, Seahawks, and 2 more playoff teams. It could be a more difficult stretch of the schedule.
Yeah. And do the Saints take a step forward? Does Shuck end up, kind of really finding a stride? And the Raiders, we look at that, but what happens if their coach really hits lightning in a bottle and down the stretch, Mendoza finds his footing, and that's no longer a game that you look at as a game that, and not even that like you said, we aren't favored in any of these games, but a game that is winnable goes to being much more difficult. So the schedule did not do us any favors.
No, it did not. And when you're talking about other issues that the Cardinals could have, I think overall linebacker is devoid of true star players. I think maybe you could say Mack Wilson is an impact player if he's back healthy, but a star player I think is a bit far of a stretch. They don't have any edge rushers that are really there besides Josh Sweat that are proven enough to, when you're talking about a Batman and a Robin, you kind of have him as a Robin, which would be like your 10 sack a year guy. And then there's a lot of like kid Robins, or that would be kind of like your comparison if you're going to like the Teen Titans essentially are going to be there. You don't really have like a true Batman Robin dynamic like you did with Chandler Jones and Marcus Golden. You don't have a lot of proven corners either. Like these are guys who are all young. They drafted a lot of players, but you don't really have a true veteran corner on the roster besides Sean Murphy Bunting. Even Starling Thomas as a veteran, he's only entering his 4th year in the league. He was an undrafted free agent. Same goes with the defensive line for the Cardinals. They added a couple of pieces to their D-line that make it a little bit better, such as adding Roy Lopez and Andrew Billings. But you're still talking about you're going to be trotting out Darius Robinson, PJ Mustipher, LJ Collier out there. We don't know if Darius Robinson is going to ever find his footing as far as what he's going to live up to that building of the 24th overall pick is going to be. There's one more that I have, at least. It's kind of an interesting negative. I'm kind of curious in some of your thoughts because a lot of this has been on the defensive side. So you're talking about positives and negatives, the good and the bad. A lot of good on the offensive side, a lot of ugly and bad on the defensive side of the ball. And it's going to be interesting because we still aren't even talking about the quarterback being the number one need. Otherwise, this would be a team primed to take an edge rusher in the first round of next year's draft.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. With what's going on with this edge rush room, you look at where do you get your premier edge rushers? Usually in the first round, but we're going to need to use that pick for a quarterback. So in the second round, you get guys like BJ Ojulari, right, who hasn't really kind of worked out for us. So what it ends up meaning is next year, because we're drafting a quarterback early, most likely, you're needing to have to either spend in free agency and or hope that some of the guys like Jordan Birch, who has not looked good so far, that those players develop. So that's a really great point. You're going to have a difficult time addressing two really big needs. You can pick one, and you know which one's going to win if they're in a position to take that. That's going to be the quarterback.
Absolutely. The last one I'll say is kind of bad, and this is maybe just a little nitpicky, but when you look at roster construction, the Cardinals want to run a lot of 12 and 13 personnel, putting out 2 tight ends, 3 tight end sets. I don't know if the roster is as well constructed for that as it is for like an 11 personnel offense. Because you bring in Kendrick Bourne as a slot receiver, you got Devin Duvernay in there, you draft Reggie Virgil in the 5th round. If you're running 12 and 13 personnel sets, you're going to have Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably going to be your main guy out there, and Michael Wilson is going to be your other receiver, or flip-flop it if you want to have Michael Wilson be that X receiver. At tight end, you got, of course, Trey McBride, who is a star. But the depth after him, you got Trey McBride coming off of an injury, and then Elijah Higgins has been a lot more of a kind of pass catcher, wide receiver playing the tight end position. So he's a receiver who can block. We saw him actually kind of play where in the Cardinals were playing in 2 tight end sets last year. He was split out and running just as much as Trey McBride was down the stretch. And granted, that was some of the Cardinals roster. But you compare it to the Rams, and the Rams, while they've got Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams as those 2 receivers, they're not going to play their slot as much in the 12 and 13 personnel. You get Colby Parkinson and Tyler Higbee as your first 2 tight ends. Obviously, neither of those guys are anywhere near the caliber of Trey McBride, but you've got depth with Terrence Ferguson, and they drafted Max Clare this past year. And I wondered if the Cardinals are really depending at least a lot on a step forward from Tip Ryman this year in order to actually run a lot of those 12 and 13 personnel sets. I don't think that's the deepest room. And if Trey McBride goes down and you're saying we want to run 12 and 13 personnel, you were really have no depth behind him as far as like if there's no replacing a Trey McBride, obviously, but you're just not going to be able to even run a 12 and 13 personnel offense without him, which is what's kind of crazy that the Rams have enough depth to pull off what I think the Cardinals want to pull off, and they didn't go out and really address the tight end position.
Yeah, and I think we, during the mock draft Monday thing we do in my channel leading up to this, talked about this a few times, that low key thought that tight end was a player position they might look at on day 3 of the draft, and they didn't. Obviously, folks who follow the draft know that there were a lot of tight ends taken. This was a big tight end draft, especially guys that can block. There's become an increasing emphasis on that because of shifts in the NFL, right? You see personnel shifts based on schematic trends. And right now, having those blocking tight ends who can be part of those kinds of offensive sets is a major area of emphasis. And the Cardinals didn't do it. They brought in, an undrafted free agent, Jamison Greer's out of Minnesota, right? Who's a guy who's going to be, at best you would anticipate being a practice squad guy probably. Ryman's coming off of an injury, right? Now he's physically talented and a good blocker.
Had a great rookie season. He was a perfect tight end too. That was there to pair with Elijah Higgins as the receiving guy, where you could swap them out based off of your team play. And obviously, neither of those guys are going to be anywhere near the blocker and receiver that Trey McBride is,
right?
Especially as a receiving aspect. Like he's a number 1 passing offense or number 1 passing threat, I should say, for any offense. But it is one of those interesting cases that we'll see how this plays out for the Arizona Cardinals, because they've got depth at a lot of other positions, but tight end is just not one of them for this year.
Yeah, that is a room that I think people don't think about it as much in terms of being an area of concern because of how good McBride is. And McBride, I think consensus top 3 tight end. Most people say number 1 overall as far as tight ends. But after him, Higgins is a nice pass catcher. Ryman has some potential, but there are some questions about the kind of person, their ability to run, the heavier personnel. And I think that's absolutely something to watch.
For sure, for sure. Well, that's the good, the bad, and the ugly for your Arizona Cardinals, at least this year, offseason in review. Let's go ahead and do a shout out to where we can find your content as well, Joe. I appreciate you coming on and joining with the new podcast under Believe Network.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always good to talk shop with you, Blake. You can find me on Twitter at JOKOMO13, JoeComo13. You can find me on YouTube at the Cardinal Rule.
And you can find me on Twitter, X at Blake Murphy7. Thanks again so much for listening. Don't forget to hit subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and write a review. You can make sure you can find the Believe on Arizona Cardinals podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Thanks again so much for tuning in, and go Arizona Cardinals.